I've been brought up in India, and so obviously, everybody in my position had read A Passage to India, because I don't think there's any doubt about it. It's the only really great masterpiece written about the Raj in India and that period. I mean, I think it's the only book that really shows both sides in all their advantages and disadvantages.
When I read the book, I thought, well, this is impossible to film, really, because it's very much a book about thoughts and people thinking, and I thought this is a very difficult book to film. But of course, I wasn't going to suggest that I didn't do it or anything like that.
I was intrigued to see how an adaptation of the book would work. I mean, the main problem with it is how do you deal with what happened in the cave? Because in the book, you can imagine it, you can do your own interpretation, but in a film, what you see is what you can draw on. So it's a very difficult conundrum, and I think that David Lean, in approaching the screenplay, I think had a huge mountain to climb. I mean, this was a book written in 1924 by a man who wasn't altogether enamoured with the female psyche, about the female psyche, and I think David Lean tackled some of those issues incredibly successfully.
Those are the Malabar Caves, about 20 miles from you at Chandrapur.
I see.
Mrs. Moore returns on the Royal Pindi on May the 12th, and your return is open. That is correct?
I'll be staying on, probably.
Getting David Lean was extraordinarily lucky. David had spent a lot of time out in India and had been terribly upset when Dickie Attenborough had made Gandhi. You must understand that when he came to be involved in the film, hadn't made a film for about 14 years, I think. But he was quite determined, because he felt he knew about India, and he'd been married to an Indian, and he'd met his wife at that time in India. He was absolutely determined to write the script himself. He wrote it in Delhi. It was a very long process. I mean, I think it took him 18 months to write the script. And when David came out of his sort of hidey hole in Bora Bora, his first words were, well, what did happen in the caves? And of course, nobody's ever really come to any reasonable conclusion there. That was our big problem in Hollywood. They all loved the script, or said they did. And one studio actually went to say, well, we will do the film, there's no problem about that, but we must have an explicit rape scene in the cave. Of course, it would have, destroyed the whole film, but on the other hand, they might have been right, they might have made a lot more money. But of course, we couldn't do that, because, it was a English classic, and we weren't about to screw it up. Luckily, Columbia put in $10 million. I mean, it's a long time ago, but even so, $10 million wasn't very much money. I think the whole picture cost somewhere in the region of $18 or $19 million, which is, like chicken feed nowadays. But we didn't actually sort of get the money till it was quite late on in the game.
When we knew the film was greenlit, so to speak, immediately we went straight out to Bangalore, because there was so much to be done out there, about 3 months before we started shooting. And most of that time was spent, actually, a month that was spent going around all the locations and finding some new ones with David and Sandra, his wife then.
After we'd found some of the locations, and we decided, because biggest problem in India is crowd control. You can't just film. And so we had to have an environment where we felt we could do what we wanted. So we hired the huge Maharaja's palace in Bangalore.
What is very difficult to do in India, because the curiosity is a great national characteristic, is to control a big area without a lot of people getting in the way. And having control over the people and the shopkeepers and all of this. And what John Boggs did so brilliantly was to design the Indian bit of Chandrapur and the market within the grounds of the palace where we were, which is basically a scale model of Balmoral, but 3 times the size. And it was walled, and obviously we had security there at night and things, but it meant that you could control it.
The main set we built there was Chandrapur sort of main street with a police station and the mosque one end and various other buildings along it. And this was peopled by, on certain days, anything up to 1,000 extras, I should think, maybe 900 or 1,000 extras with a full market. And the arrival in Chandrapur, when the collector drives through in his car, is straight through that market. And that was a most extraordinary set, because we peopled it with villagers and locals, and in order to give it an authentic look, we actually gave everybody, you know, a function for the day. We would give them a stall selling powdered paints and colours and things, and say, right, this is your stall for the day, so you've got to really try and sell it. And of course we realised very quickly that the stalls which had food on it and things like that, which were going to suddenly actually get very, very empty, because they were going to try and really sell the food and people were going to really eat the food. So we had to spin a tale through the crowds that the food had been treated with preservative and was poisoned, so the fruit and the veg wasn't, you know, after 3 takes was completely gone.
Christopher told me that he couldn't work out why the extras budget for that day had sort of doubled. Of course, he didn't realise that all the guys were getting paid and then running around and joining the queue again, and they would just come round again. It was a magnificent set. You know, we built everything in the film. Everything is a build. Because David liked control, and you know, if you go down a real street, David can't control it. I mean, you know, there are certain times of the day out there when you hear, you know, wailing goes on because it's a certain time of prayer, and of course, in the middle of a scene, get hold of that man, you know. And well, you sort of can't do that. But he had no control, you see, so we'd have to stop. So he liked to control the set, and so we did just build them. A mile-long market. Build it.
We built all our sets in the grounds. In fact, we used the palace for all kinds of things, like the ship arriving in Bombay, the entrance to the towns, Ballard Pier, all kinds of things that we used it for. And it was a great back lot. It was a huge, huge success then.
One of the other interesting preparations for creating a set was the creation of this field of elephant grass for Adila's journey on her bicycle, where she goes off on a trip, and she comes across these erotic statues in seemingly sort of very overgrown state. There again, about 3 or 4 months, maybe even more, but probably 4 or 5 months before we shot that, the location was chosen, and the elephant grass was actually planted and seeded at that time. When we chose the location, there was only probably 4 or 5 inches of scrub, and when we came back 4 or 5 months later, there was 5 to 6 feet of elephant grass over an enormous acreage in which this path had been made, on which you could cycle. So we grew the set.
John Box was a genius at that sort of thing. He'd been a tank commander in the war. And he was just extraordinarily well organized and very, very talented and sensitive. So he was able to sort of produce anything that David wanted. I mean, the civilian lines, all those houses, an astonishing set he built, all neat, and all the entrances and the mosques and all that kind of thing. And then the market. But he was very, very good at making things out of nothing. He was a very, 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 very good designer.
The detailing on John's sets was just incredible. I mean, you walked onto those sets and you just thought this completely works. You know, you talk about turning around, looking down the street, and you are looking down the street. You know, it's a fantastic environment to work in because you don't have to do anything. Really, you know, you've been given the clothes, you've been given the set. All you got to do is just do it. It's brilliant. It's what one remembers. For me, it was like just suddenly being introduced to me. I thought, well, wow, this is fantastic. This is the British film industry, you know, at its best. You know, even though it is financed by America, but it was just an extraordinary place to be.